Warning, 4 bread brands that 48 U.S. states must recall and destroy at all costs. See this. This is Discover USA Collapse, and what I'm about to tell you may change the way you look at bread forever. For decades, bread has been marketed as the foundation of the American table, the symbol of comfort, family, and daily life. You picture a warm slice with butter melting on top, the sandwiches packed for school lunches, or the toast in the morning with your coffee. But behind that simple image is an unfolding crisis that has already triggered alarm bells in nearly every state across the nation. Investigators, consumer watchdogs, and even attorneys general in multiple states are now circling the bread aisle, not for nostalgia, but for evidence of contamination, false labeling, and practices that could put millions of families at risk. Think about this. The average American eats over 53 pounds of bread every year. That means what you choose from that shelf is not just an occasional indulgence, it is a constant part of your bloodstream, your gut, and your family's diet. And when brands you've trusted for generations start cutting corners, or worse, deliberately hiding what's in their loaves, the danger multiplies. These loaves aren't just stale or overpriced. We are talking about recalls powerful enough that federal regulators are stepping in, and state officials in 48 states are already preparing legal pathways to force these products off the shelves. The reason? Because it's no longer just about food. It's about public health, corporate deception, and the slow poisoning of a nation that still thinks bread is safe. Picture the grocery aisle on a Saturday morning. Parents pushing carts, kids pulling at sleeves, the bakery scent pumped in to make you believe everything is fresh and harmless. On those same shelves sit loaves that have been linked to chemical additives banned in other countries, to mold outbreaks that triggered emergency recalls, to supply chains that cut through factories already flagged for contamination. You're not just buying bread. You might be buying the seeds of chronic illness, endocrine disruption, even long-term neurological damage, and all of it hidden beneath the label that says healthy, whole grain, or family farm. And here's the real betrayal. Most of these brands have spent decades cultivating trust. They've been in TV commercials during football games, sponsoring school lunches, placing smiling families on their packaging. They have jingles you could probably still sing today. And yet, behind the curtain, their executives know exactly what's happening. They know the cost-cutting that replaced natural ingredients with chemical shortcuts. They know about the machinery left uncleaned for weeks at a time, producing loaves with higher and higher bacterial loads. And they know that government agencies are now quietly documenting the fallout from rashes and digestive emergencies in children to lawsuits filed by parents who had no idea the bread their kids ate was slowly harming them. If you think this sounds like exaggeration, let me remind you of the recent string of recalls that barely made it onto the nightly news. Flour tainted with pesticides far above legal limits. Loaves tested in independent labs showing titanium dioxide, a whitening agent banned in the European Union for its cancer links, still in circulation here in the U.S. entire. Batches pulled back after metal shavings were found, baked directly into the crust. These aren't fringe stories. They are warnings buried under corporate press releases designed to downplay the threat. And the question we have to ask is, if these were the cases that got caught, how many more slipped under the radar, ending up on dinner tables across America? Every slice you toast, every sandwich you build, carries with it the assumption of safety. But what if that assumption is wrong? What if right now bread is no longer the staff of life, but one of the most dangerous everyday products in your kitchen? Because that's exactly what emerging reports are showing. And when 48 states are preparing to take drastic action, that is not coincidence. That is a collapse of trust at the very foundation of American food supply. This is Discover USA Collapse, and today we're exposing the 4 bread brands that must be recalled and destroyed at all costs. By the end of this video, you'll know which names to avoid, how their deception was uncovered, and why millions of Americans are waking up to the reality that the bread they thought was safe is, in fact, one of the biggest dangers hiding in plain sight. Stay with me, because once you hear the names on this list, you'll never look at the bread aisle the same way again. Number 4, Wonder Bread. For most Americans, this name is nostalgia itself. The bright red, yellow, and blue balloons printed on the package, the soft white loaf that defined the childhood peanut butter and jelly sandwich, the commercials that promised build strong bodies 12 ways. Wonder Bread is supposed to represent trust, tradition, and a piece of Americana. But peel back the packaging, and what investigators have uncovered is the opposite of wonder. It's a warning. Independent laboratory tests in 2024 revealed traces of calcium propionate and potassium bromate in several batches. Potassium bromate, let's be clear, is banned in countries across Europe, Canada, and even Brazil for being a possible carcinogen. Yet here in the US, the FDA has allowed it to remain in circulation. And major corporations like the one behind Wonder Bread have quietly used it as a cheap shortcut to make dough rise faster and bread appear fluffier. What that means in real life is that millions of American families are unknowingly feeding their children an additive that other nations have already determined is too risky for human health. It doesn't stop there. Earlier this year, regulators in Illinois and Michigan issued alerts after mold contamination was detected in certain shipments. Mold in bread isn't surprising if a loaf is left out too long at home, but this was discovered at the distribution level, meaning bread was already spoiling before it ever hit the shelves. That suggests storage and transportation systems were compromised, and that hygiene inside warehouses failed at the most basic level. A nationwide brand with billion-dollar advertising budgets couldn't guarantee that the simplest product, flour, water, yeast, was safe by the time it reached store shelves. For consumers, that is not just negligence. It's betrayal. Think of the trust Wonder Bread has built. It was the bread you saw in your grandparents' kitchen, the bread your parents packed in your lunchbox, the bread that symbolized the American dream of abundance after the Great Depression. To now learn that this symbol has been tainted by chemical shortcuts and spoiled inventory is enough to erode the confidence of entire generations. And in fact, it has. Social media is full of testimonies from parents who bought Wonder Bread recently, only to find mold inside sealed packages days before the expiration date. Others complain about stomach upset, allergic reactions, and a strange aftertaste that wasn't there when they were children. These aren't isolated complaints. They form a pattern, and that pattern points to deeper problems that can no longer be dismissed as coincidence. Meanwhile, lawsuits have started piling up. In late 2024, a class action suit alleged that Wonder Bread mislabeled its loaves as wholesome and healthy, despite using controversial additives. Consumers argue that this labeling amounts to false advertising, a direct violation of trust that could have financial consequences for the parent company. And behind closed doors, insiders whisper about cost-cutting measures, equipment not cleaned on schedule, corners cut on ingredient sourcing, suppliers chosen not for quality but for the lowest possible price. Bread, which should be the simplest food on earth, has become a cocktail of chemical interventions and logistical failures. Now, zoom out. Wonder Bread isn't just a brand. It's a symbol of how far the American food system has fallen. When the company that defined childhood nostalgia is now being flagged in multiple states for chemical risks and contamination, what does that say about the rest of the bread aisle? If Wonder Bread is on the chopping block, no brand is truly safe. That's why 48 states are preparing to step in. It's no longer a question of if Wonder Bread will face massive recalls, it's when. And when that hammer drops, it won't just be a corporate embarrassment, it will be a national wake-up call. Number 3, Sara Lee. For decades, Sara Lee has marketed itself with one of the most comforting slogans in the food industry. Nobody doesn't like Sara Lee. The name conjures images of buttery pound cakes, sweet baked goods, and soft loaves of bread that felt more premium than the rest of the aisle. It was supposed to be the better choice, the one moms reached for when they wanted something slightly higher quality, something they could trust. But the truth emerging now is that Sara Lee's bread products are under the same scrutiny as Wonder Bread, and in some cases, the allegations are even more disturbing. In late 2024, consumer watchdog groups revealed that multiple Sara Lee products contained azotocarbonamide, a chemical that became infamous years ago as the so-called yoga mat chemical. While banned in Australia and parts of Europe for its potential health risks, this compound continues to appear in American bread to help improve texture and shelf life. Parents believed they were giving their kids a wholesome sandwich bread, but in reality, they were feeding them an additive linked to respiratory issues and allergic reactions. The real kicker? Sara Lee's marketing often leans on words like fresh, wholesome, and natural, even while quietly sliding in these industrial-grade substances. And then there's the shocking wave of recalls. In November 2024, Sara Lee was forced to recall over 4,000 loaves across the Midwest after fragments of plastic were discovered baked into the bread. The company blamed a malfunction in its production line, but critics argue this points to systemic failures. If foreign objects like plastic are making it into food at this scale, what else could be slipping by unnoticed? The idea that you could sit down for a sandwich and bite into a piece of machinery should terrify any family that thought brand recognition was a shield against carelessness. Worse yet, Sara Lee has also been accused of price manipulation. As inflation surged, their loaves jumped in price by as much as 35% in some states. Yet the ingredient quality didn't improve. In fact, investigative reporters suggest it got worse, with cheaper flour imports and downgraded sweeteners quietly replacing what had been standard before. Families were paying more for less, all while advertising told them they were buying premium. For seniors living on fixed incomes and families already struggling with grocery bills, this wasn't just deceptive, it was cruel. Consumers across 48 states are demanding action. From Illinois to Florida, parents have filed reports of stomach irritation in children after eating Sara Lee bread, while advocacy groups are calling for a full federal investigation into labeling and safety practices. The brand that once prided itself on being a cut above now finds itself lumped in with the very companies it once looked down on. In social media groups, the betrayal is palpable. People share stories of loaves going moldy within 48 hours, of labels that don't match the ingredient lists, of recalls that never reached their local news. The trust is broken, and once that happens, no marketing slogan can repair it. At its heart, Sara Lee shows us something chilling. If a brand that built its empire on comfort food, on being the safe bet in the bread aisle, can fall this far, then no American household staple is beyond suspicion. This isn't just about taste or nostalgia anymore. It's about safety, corporate honesty, and the right to know what we're putting into our bodies. The fact that 48 states are already reviewing Sara Lee's compliance means that the countdown to mandatory recalls has already started. And when it happens, it will be another blow to the illusion that big brands are trustworthy simply because they've been around for generations. Number 2, Pepperidge Farm. For many Americans, this name means something different from Wonder Bread or Sara Lee. Pepperidge Farm was always marketed as the fancy option, the artisanal bread in a bag, the brand you'd buy when you wanted to feel a little more upscale, a little healthier, a little more sophisticated. With their rustic packaging, whole grain promises, and slogans about quality since 1937, they positioned themselves as the antidote to cheap, mass-produced bread. But here's the devastating truth. Behind that wholesome, premium image lies a series of scandals that prove even the so-called high-end brands are cutting corners and betraying consumers. Just last year, Pepperidge Farm faced lawsuits over misleading health claims. Their whole grain bread was advertised as delivering heart-healthy fiber, yet independent testing found that several of their loaves contained less than half the whole grain content promised on the label. Instead, the bread was packed with refined flour, stabilizers, and sugar additives, the very ingredients consumers were trying to avoid when they paid extra for Pepperidge Farm. That means families weren't just being deceived. They were paying more for what was essentially the same cheap white bread dressed up in rustic packaging, and it gets worse. In October 2024, several shipments of Pepperidge Farm bread were linked to a listeria scare in distribution centers across the Northeast. While the company downplayed the incident and insisted the contamination was contained, state regulators in New York and Pennsylvania confirmed that the affected bread had already reached store shelves before the recall notice went out. Listeria is not something you shrug off. It's a potentially deadly bacteria, especially for seniors, pregnant women, and people with weakened immune systems. To think that this could slip past a premium brand's safety checks is not only alarming but unforgivable. Consumers have also begun noticing how the quality of Pepperidge Farm loaves has steadily declined. Complaints of thinner slices, inconsistent texture, and a chemical aftertaste have multiplied on social media. Longtime customers are openly saying, "This doesn't taste like the Pepperidge Farm I grew up with." Many blame the parent company, Campbell's Soup, for pushing profits over quality, turning what was once a trusted family bakery into another corporate machine. By chasing efficiency and lowering costs, they have eroded the very thing that made Pepperidge Farm stand out in the first place, its supposed integrity. The anger is growing, and the financial damage is real. Reports show that sales of Pepperidge Farm bread dropped by nearly 12% in late 2024 as consumers migrated to local bakeries or alternative brands they perceived as safer. That decline mirrors a broader trend. Americans are starting to see that a fancy logo and a higher price tag don't guarantee safety or honesty. And when state officials from 48 states are already circling, preparing recall actions, it's clear that Pepperidge Farm is not going to escape the net. They will be held accountable, and their reputation as the better bread will collapse under the weight of their own deception. Pepperidge Farm was supposed to represent choice, quality, and a little indulgence. Instead, it has become the perfect example of how corporations exploit trust, dress up cheap ingredients as artisan, and gamble with public health while hiding behind nostalgic branding. For millions of Americans who once paid more believing they were buying peace of mind, the betrayal cuts deep. And when that betrayal finally erupts into nationwide recalls, it will remind everyone that in today's America, no bread brand is truly safe. Number 1, Bimbo Bakeries. If you don't recognize the name right away, that's exactly how the corporation wants it. Because behind the cheerful bear logo and the soft white loaves that fill shelves from coast to coast, Bimbo Bakeries controls an empire of bread brands that most Americans buy without realizing they're all under the same roof. Arnold, Brownberry, Entenmann's, Freihofer's, Thomas's, even Sara Lee in certain regions, all of them fall under this conglomerate's umbrella. It is the largest bakery company in the United States, and yet it is also the one now facing the most severe backlash. Why? Because when a single corporation dominates this much of the bread aisle, any systemic failure becomes a nationwide crisis, and that is exactly what we are seeing unfold. In early 2025, multiple whistleblowers from inside Bimbo Bakeries factories came forward with disturbing claims. Ovens left uncleaned for days, dough mixed in bins with visible residue from previous batches, pest infestations in distribution centers that were quietly handled without proper reporting. One worker described rats in a facility in New Jersey leaving droppings near packaging areas, with managers instructing staff to clean quickly and keep the line moving. These aren't isolated incidents. They point to a corporate culture where volume and speed outweigh safety and hygiene. And when you're producing bread on a scale that reaches millions of households daily, those shortcuts aren't just dangerous, they're catastrophic. But hygiene is only one piece of the puzzle. Independent food safety labs have found that Bimbo's bread products contain some of the highest levels of glyphosate residue in the industry. Glyphosate, the active ingredient in Roundup, has been linked in multiple lawsuits to cancer risks, and yet it remains in America's food system because wheat crops are often heavily sprayed before harvest. Consumers buying Bimbo's breads, whether under the Arnold label or Thomas's English muffins, are ingesting measurable levels of this chemical with every bite. And while the company insists that the amounts fall within legal limits, those limits are far looser in the US than in Europe or Asia. In other words, what is deemed acceptable here would never pass inspection in countries that take public health more seriously. The recalls keep piling up. Just last fall, Bimbo had to recall thousands of loaves after metal fragments were discovered in bread produced at a Pennsylvania facility. Before that, mislabeling incidents resulted in people with severe allergies being exposed to undeclared milk and soy in supposedly safe products. And in 2023, an entire line of bagels was pulled from shelves after mold growth was discovered in sealed packaging across 5 states. Each time, Bimbo issued a statement promising higher standards and corrective action. But each time, another problem emerged, proving that these are not accidents. They are symptoms of a broken system, one that prioritizes dominance of the market over the safety of the consumer. The financial stakes are massive. Bimbo Bakeries rakes in billions every year. But now regulators in 48 states are eyeing them closely, preparing for the possibility of coordinated recalls that would send shockwaves through the American food industry. For everyday consumers, this means that the bread you thought was the safe, default option, whether a cheap white loaf or a slightly more expensive whole wheat bag, could vanish overnight if the hammer falls. And maybe it should. Because as long as companies like Bimbo are allowed to dominate, cut corners, and gamble with public health, the collapse of trust will only spread wider. The betrayal cuts even deeper because of what bread represents in American life. Bread is not just food. It is ritual, tradition, survival. From the sandwiches we pack in our children's lunches to the rolls we share at Thanksgiving, bread is supposed to bind families together. To see that trust corrupted by one of the largest corporations in the industry is more than just another recall. It is a symbol of how fragile our food system has become. When one giant controls everything, the collapse of one loaf becomes the collapse of an entire way of eating. So when we say that 48 states must recall and destroy these brands at all costs, it's not alarmism, it's reality. Because the stakes are no longer just about stale bread or higher prices. They're about what happens when corporations forget that food is not just a commodity, it's life itself. And until we reclaim that truth, No loaf in America is truly safe. So now you've seen the truth. Wonder Bread, Sara Lee, Pepperidge Farm, and the giant Bimbo Bakeries empire. 4 brands that once stood as symbols of trust, nostalgia, and comfort, but now face the reality of recalls, contamination, chemical shortcuts, and betrayal on a national scale. These aren't just bad business decisions. They are signs of a deeper collapse in the American food system, one where corporate profit is placed above human health, and where regulators are constantly one step behind the next disaster. Think about what this means for you and your family. The bread you pack in your child's lunch, the toast you eat every morning, the rolls on your holiday table, all of them might already carry risks that other countries refuse to tolerate. If 48 states are preparing to act, then we are staring at a moment unlike anything in recent memory, a possible mass recall of products that touch nearly every kitchen in America. The question isn't just which bread you should buy. It's whether we can even trust the bread aisle at all. This is Discover USA Collapse, and we are here to uncover the stories corporations hope you never hear. Bread has always been called the staff of life. But if the staff is rotting, what does that say about the future of American food? Do you think these recalls go far enough? Or is it already too late to save trust in the brands that once defined our tables? Let me know what you think in the comments, and stay tuned, because the collapse has only just begun.